Hey everybody, welcome to What's Your Point Overtime. This is value added. I want to start with this. Mark, how big is the Republican primary electorate? I mean, how many Texans are actually running the state of Texas? Because that group of folks are calling the shots.
Well, depending on if it's a runoff or presidential year, it's between 1 and 2 million statewide in a state that's now approaching 30 million. It's a small group of people, but we saw back in 2022 that it's really the decisive group. That is, every Republican statewide that got through their primary ended up winning by between 10 and 15 points. It also, with the increasing, with the redistricting and gerrymandered districts, it also ensures who runs the Senate through the end of the decade, because 19 of those seats are pretty much rock solid Republican. Even in a bad election, at most they're going to lose one, and they could actually go up to, it's more likely to go up to 20 than down to 18. And even the House has only about between 6 and 10 competitive seats. So all power now still runs through the Republican primary electorate. And once they vote for somebody, it's pretty much locked in for what's going to happen in November.
Okay, Gary Pollan, you talk to Republicans a lot. What are they saying about this impending impeachment trial?
Yeah, it's the people I'm talking to are actually pretty open and want to be fair and let the process come out. It's not like they're committed. Some of the more rabid people who believe Paxton is the only one who can take on the federal government, and President Biden thinks that whatever sins he had should be ignored because he's doing such a wonderful job. Of course, I disagree profoundly. Whoever gets this job, if he's out, will do the same thing he did. It's the same thing that Governor Abbott did when he was Attorney General. It's not going to change. So, and I guess I have some disagreement in that people are all knowledgeable and know all of this stuff. I don't think they have any clue about the depth of this. I found that and I watched the video, it was a live stream of the House managers making the presentation. I thought their presentation was riveting. I was actually, and I know a lot, and I was stunned at all the other stuff I was learning about Ken and the allegations against him. And there's just a lot of smoke. So the question is there fire? And if there's fire, I don't think the politics are, maybe I'm an optimist. I don't think the politics are going to matter if there's fire.
Yeah, as often happens, we have a major case, I go straight to Chris Tritico. And Chris Tritico said to me, he said, hey, look, Ken Paxton deserves this indictment.
Well, he bought it all by himself, and he earned it. The question becomes in the Senate, are they willing to put the politics aside? And if Gary's right, and I hope he is, it'll be a fair trial. History hasn't dictated that, unfortunately, in removal trials. Bill Clinton probably deserved removal, and he won. Donald Trump probably deserved removal twice, and he won. I wasn't old enough to pay attention to the last removal trial in the Texas Senate, and I wasn't alive on the one before that. But I venture to guess those were all politics too. And so removal trials are generally centered around politics, and I fear that this one will do the same.
All right, we completed the regular broadcast with, I think, pretty unanimous agreement that Dan Patrick holds all the cards here on Ken Paxton's future, at least in terms of elected office. Bill, can you see, have you heard any reason why Patrick would like to replace this guy? I have heard him referred to as a cancer. His behavior, it's repugnant. And that folks who are of integrity say we can do better than that, and this is a chance to get rid of him. Damn the torpedoes politically.
So I think the issue, it'd be interesting to really hear what Patrick's political calculus is on this. If I were him, I'd be really starting to worry about the Republican Party. Everything that our professor said to us about where the polling is today and the control, that is all absolutely true. But I have a feeling we're about to go through a catharsis where that may not be true in the future. George Friedman, somebody that I read a lot, he's a futurist geopolitical guy out of Austin. He thinks the 24 election is really going to be a watershed event, much like the 1980 Ronald Reagan election was. It's going to sort of bring a new era into politics. And he thinks there's going to be some really seismic changes in the political landscape. Now, I tell you, I look at things like how this abortion issue is hurting the Republican Party in general elections right now. And I know a lot of women that don't like the Democratic Party and really vote Republican 80-90% of the time, saying, I've had it with these guys. I've had it, you know. The medical community saying, I've had it with not knowing if I can help somebody or not. So I don't know, the Republican Party is way out on a limb, I think. And if you get too far out on a limb, they tend to break off sooner or later.
Yeah, I mean, there appears to be this group of people that have become addicted to, you know, conspiracy theories, the deep state, you know, and everybody's against it. I talked to folks who didn't even know the merits of the case at all and just assumed that this was a hit job on their hero, Ken Paxton. And you know, that's tough to, especially when they're people you like, to respond to. Mark, I mean, you know, give us a sense of who that 2 million people are that are the rank and file, that are the deciders, so to speak, on who runs Texas government, because we're a red state still.
Well, I think there are people who, in many ways, don't get their news and information from the same sources often as sort of the general electorate. They tend to get from more partisan sources. They're more prone to confirmation bias, that is, looking for information that confirms what they think and ignoring information that doesn't. And they live and work in different networks that don't really challenge those beliefs as they interact with people through social media and personally. So and the same thing happens on the Democratic side. It's just they don't control the state. If we were in California, the same problems affect Democrats there, where they live in their own alternative reality. But we're in Texas, so we're talking about the Republican primary voters. But it's a group that still is very important. It makes the decision. And up until now, in the general election, people are still sticking with the label. And actually, if anything, polarization has gotten worse over the past couple of years. That is, the probability that someone who votes Republican for one candidate is going to vote all Republican, that's increased a little bit, even after we got rid of straight ticket voting. That's one of the ironies. We got rid of straight ticket voting and thought, okay, well, now people are going to be able to go candidate by candidate by candidate. What we're seeing is more straight ticket voting even without that device, even in Harris County, where you have to vote in 100 races. People now will go 100 down and vote DDD all the way down, R all the way down.
Chris, I think what I just heard was a tyranny of the minority against the majority.
So, you know, and I don't want to, I hate to reduce these allegations to minutia, but the general public doesn't pay attention to the minutia of politics. And they tend to look at politics at this, 1,000 feet up. I heard that Joe Biden was going to cancel Social Security, so I'm not voting for him anymore. And they don't know anything about actually what's happening down below. And that's where we're voting. And so when all this stuff came out and you were watching the House thing, you pay very close attention. I pay very close attention. I didn't know any of this stuff. And so the public has no idea these allegations, the meat of these allegations. And I venture to guess that the Republican voting public has no idea how serious these allegations are against Ken Paxton. They're just looking from 1,000 feet up and seeing this attack on their guy.
Yeah, so if Mark Jones went in the field with a poll and asked the Republican primary voters, do you support a Republican elected official who takes bribes, the answer would be no. And if you break these down into simple things, that's what would happen. But instead, the soundbite that comes from the other side in this is, this is the deep state. They're after me because I'm conservative. Right. There's a double standard of justice. All the lines you hear. So they're hearing those simple lines and not the simple lines. But if they watch in the media, and I'm sure the media is not going to give Paxton favorable coverage, the mainstream media. So it is all going to come out. And then people get to decide who they believe. Now, part of the problem of believing the mainstream media is they've earned the badge of not being trustworthy over the last 4, 6, 8 years.
Right. Go ahead, Bill.
Well, we keep talking about the primary voters, and Mark is right that that's what determines who's going to be on the ballot. But when you get to the general ballot, for people like me, for those of us in the middle, you've got two choices. And so am I going to vote for, a Republican who's got questionable ethics or a Democrat that's going to defund police? That's the kind of choices. And if you're a suburban mom, you think, I can't really stand that SOB, but I really like having the police show up at my house. Yeah. That is the dichotomy. And you used a line from one of my columns, the tyranny of the minorities. I mean, look, the abortion law in Texas as currently written is supported by about 15% of Texans. Somewhere around 80% of Texans disagree with our abortion laws as currently written.
That's how you ask the question.
Well, I agree with that. But if you talk about banning abortion all the way to birth, all the way to conception, there's only about 10 or 12% of Texans that agree with that.
We ask we present a question where we preside the exact law and say, do you support keeping it as is, making it easier, making it harder? And it's about 30% like it as is, about 10% want to make it harder, whatever
that's with the exception for the health of the mother.
Yeah, with the exception, right. And then 11% don't want the exception for the health of the mother. It's about 40%. But if you ask a question about which of these do you support, then you're going to get more pro-choice responses. The public it really depends on the questions you ask. If I ask, do you support 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 20 weeks? I'm going to get in Texas, the median is going to be somewhere between 12 and 15 weeks. Right. If I say, do you support the current legislation, and I tell them what that legislation is, there's a group that wants to leave it alone. So what is clear, regardless of what polling you do, Texas has overcorrected to the right. That is, Texas is at an extreme in abortion policy that's at odds with where the median voter is. If it would add an abortion and incest, a rape and incest exception, and move it to about 6 weeks, that's where you hit about the 50% line.
Right. Did you ask the ones who want to make it harder what they're going to do? Send somebody in the room?
Well, I had no idea, but with saying that this is the poll we also did of Californians, and we asked them about easier, so it's also not clear. Is it is it In-N-Out Burger now offers abortions?
Yeah. If you add if you put on the ballot, I want exception for rape and incest. Yeah. Exception for health and mother, and up to 15 weeks. Yeah. About 70 or 80% of Texans would vote for that law over the law we have today.
But look, I
think if you gave them 12 weeks, though, they would vote for 12 weeks over 15 weeks.
Probably right.
I don't know how many times I've read Mark's polling, which is very accurate, and I'll call Bill King and say, look, do you see this? Majority of Texans favor red flag laws. Yeah. Majority of Texans want to raise the age from 18 to 21. Majority of Texans want to do this. Majority of Texans want casino gambling. Majority of Texans want marijuana legalized or at least decriminalized. And the Texas Senate did none of that, which shows you what kind of body we've got judging Ken Paxton.
But the reason, the reason people in the middle, a lot of my friends keep voting for Republicans, even though they don't like them, is because the Democrats are so awful. I mean, look at the candidates they put argument. Up. That is the problem.
Yeah, Garcia was like a communist. She was a communist.
Yeah. I mean, Bill, you and I see eye to eye on that, 100%. Within the context of what's happening in Austin right now, Mark, is it a fair statement that the Texas Senate is more conservative than the Republican-controlled Texas House?
Yeah, I mean, its members are more conservative, in part because Dan Patrick has helped shape the Senate. We don't have Kel Seliger anymore, Robert Duncan, Kevin Eltife, John Corona, Bob Dewell, Tommy Williams, all the people, Larry Taylor, all the moderates. And then also, one person controls the Senate. They're directly elected. That's the lieutenant governor, and they exercise the constitutional power. The speaker exists with the support of the members. And it's only with those support of the members that Speaker Phelan can survive. So he has to balance a very diverse coalition of moderate to center-right Republicans, Democrats, and conservative Republicans and liberal Democrats to keep things going. So it's just, as a body, it's not going to produce the same conservative legislation.
Exactly. So here's my question. Is the conservative Senate just going to say, he may be a crook, but he's our crook, and we're circling the wagons around him?
They could,
but I mean, I think though a lot of the sort of the public, there's how do the Republican primary voters react, and then there's what the senators could do if in private. I think if they could have a vote where their vote was not counted and never seen, most Republicans want to get rid of Ken Paxton. He's an embarrassment. As I think Gary said, you could have somebody just as conservative, probably more intelligent.
Not taking graft.
Yeah, and not corrupt, not an adulterer, not a pen thief. All those things. You could have that person, and they could be just.
Why don't you accuse him of beating his dog?
See,
too?
But we don't know about that
That's
yet.
why I keep coming back to this motion to dismiss.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go in there, you could vote to censure him, you could say he's a terrible person, I mean, just completely beat him up, but say, the Supreme Court just has said that we can't do this because, you guys elected him last time, and maybe you shouldn't reelect him next time. It just seems like such an easy out for me.
I think that either doing it at the start or doing it at the end, that does provide the cover for those senators who can't ignore that he's a criminal or he's committed crimes.
It depends on the evidence.
Okay, now I'm going to get really cynical.
If there's
How
evidence.
could the impeachment of Ken Paxton be just a card being played within the context of several special sessions we're going to see and different agendas out there, i.e. Governor Abbott's desire for school choice and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick's desire for homestead exemptions within the big property tax rebate that's going to happen. I mean, Mark, any thoughts there?
Well, it could be. I mean, one of the realities is all of this evidence has been there, but Speaker Phelan did not decide to bring the same to charge. Now, they will say, well, because he asked for $3.3 million. Well, the legislature gave away billions in money to special interests with a whole host of things that they signed. Even in Houston, we've given away hundreds of millions to housing that's
housing scams.
Housing scams. So $3.3 million is trivial. But you could say that Paxton opened the door, but the House could have done this at any time. Speaker Phelan chose to, one, do it this session, and two, he could have waited until after the session ended, or he could have waited or done not at all. But he chose in the midst of this final hectic, frayed week to launch this bomb, which essentially exploded the final week of the session. Some of that has to do with, I think, political jockeying. I think in part probably the House was a little tired of being on the receiving end of a Senate offensive, where it was playing defense the whole time. This allowed it to go on the offense. Now, whether this was part of a calculation or just something that evolved over time, I don't know, because I don't live in Beaumont even.
Yeah, Gary, Abbott vetoed 77 bills, mostly from the Senate, and Phelan sitting over there in league with the governor on property taxes relief, with a bigger piece of the rebate pie going to the wealthiest Texans. Could any decision, Patrick could say, hey, well, if that's the way it's going to be, I'll accept the motion to dismiss on the forgiveness doctrine. I mean, is that a possibility?
I don't think that Patrick's trade in this trial, or what happens in this trial for property tax reform, I don't think the governor is either. I mean, look, this is a clash of titans on this issue. And I don't know who's going to blink first. I mean, the Senate did come up with a compromise plan that was authored primarily by Senator Betancourt that combined both. So there's an out there now for Abbott to say, okay, well, we've got this. I can live with it and go forward. But I don't think it's passing this next week. So there's going to have to be another special session. And at some point, you figure the governor wants to get some things done. First session now was a waste of time. A lot of the session turns out to be a waste of time because of all the vetoes. I didn't understand the vetoes. I didn't understand the veto message. And I don't know what the message he was sending. Generally, and if you remember when Perry was governor, Perry was very active. Perry would go on the floor of the House and Senate. Perry would make clear what his positions are. Abbott a little more cryptic. And so he didn't make clear that some of these bills he didn't like and that I'm going to veto this. And Bush did the same thing. So my advice, if the Governor Abbott's asking me, I think there's going to be more transparency with the House and Senate of what your priorities are and what you don't want. Because everybody understands, yeah, you have the veto power and you can use it. It's constitutional, absolutely. And your opinion matters. But you got to tell people what your opinion is.
Chris, I think I called Bill and said, gosh, talk about not being able to stand prosperity. So the Republicans in November just kicked the snot out of the Democrats. Double digits. Ken Paxton gets double digits.
Yes.
They enter this session with an unprecedented $30 billion plus surplus to hand out. Yeah. And they end up in a cage fight, over a piece of the pie that should be bigger in the House's estimation for the richest Texans.
Yeah. Well, part of that goes together. That is, if you don't have the threat of a credible opposition, the fight goes internal. You don't have that opposition, the threat of the opposition actually defeating you to bring you together. And so if you're not worried about Democrats, then have the battle out among yourselves because you're not fearful that it's going to come back to haunt you in the fall of 2024 or beyond.
Chris, as you've watched this, are you worried about the Democratic Party? I mean, they were just kind of sidelined.
No, it's going to be a few more election cycles before the Democratic Party is a threat in Texas, and it's just
Been hearing that my entire life, Chris.
Well,
Fine few.
Yeah, I don't know.
Right now, they're just a threat to themselves. They are.
They're just not. They're not